What up, everybody? Welcome back, and we are going to do this paint series in a three-part series. So this is going to be part one. This is going to be prep work. Prep work is the single most fundamental part of a paint job. I don't care how good you can lay designs. I don't care if you can lay glass. I don't care if you can sling flake. I do not care about any of that. Prep work is the foundation, the most basic element to a beautiful paint job. If your prep work sucks, your paint job's gonna suck. That's just all there is to it. Not to mention, if you don't do the prep work properly, you're gonna have a really frustrating time. You're gonna be laying your base coat, you're gonna be laying tape lines, pulling them up, and your paint's gonna pull off, your paint's not gonna stick correctly, your clear coat's gonna be soft. Trust me. This is the single most important stage in painting. When it comes to painting, there's a level of importance. Level one, this is the most important, is prep work. Level two, the second most important, is your finish work. And then everything else, your designs and your laying and your painting and whatever, all of that goes in the middle. But prep and finish are killer. They will make or break a paint job. So let's get into this prep work. So when you get fenders that are made out of fiberglass, just because it's primer does not mean that you can paint over this. You have to sand this down. I use 800 grit sandpaper and I wet sand this completely flat. Also, when you're going to be drilling your holes, make sure you drill your hardware holes pre-paint, because if you paint this and then you drill these holes, it'll ripple up your clear coat and you're going to have a really bad day. So make sure that you drill all the hardware holes first. Sand this down with 800 grit, and I'm going to show you guys how to sand, but I just want to make sure you understand, when you get these fiberglass fenders, just because they're primed, do not paint over that primer. You want to sand this down and then re-prime it again and then sand it again. When it comes to sanding, if you see these saddlebags, this one's shiny, this one's dull. I'm going to show you how to sand and how to get this to look like that, but this is the most important part. If you look in here and you see these little shiny spots, right there, right there, right there, these are all trouble areas. You do not want any shiny spots. When you sand this, when you wet sand this, you want to make sure that this is completely flat. And is when you lay your base coat over this and then you go to do your tape lines, if this isn't sanded down properly, that base coat's not going to adhere properly, and when you pull up your tape line, it is going to pull all of that paint up and you're gonna have a really bad day. So when I go to sand this down, I'm gonna be using a spray bottle with water in it. You can use warm soapy water. This is easier because I constantly spray and rinse. Instead of using a DA sander, I like doing it by hand because I can run my fingers along and feel where I've hit. With a DA, you can go too sharp into spots. I like to use 800 grit just because it's a lot easier to work with, rough enough to break this down, but it's not too gritty to leave areas with structural integrity issues. Spray my surface. Spray this down. And then, this is just my personal preference, I like to wrap it in a foam sponge like this. And whenever I'm sanding, I drag my pinky or my thumb across this, and I can feel whenever it's sanded down properly, and it won't be slick anymore. It'll be a little rough. So take it like this, and then when I start, I will go in long motions like this, all back and forth. You can go in circles once you break it down, because when you're going this way, if there's any high areas, it'll skip over. So I like to go this way, and then I'll go diagonally, and then lastly I'll go in circles. And as you can see, my pinky and my thumb, I can feel where it's going. Now when you get up to high areas like this where this cleft is, make sure that you get inside of here. So take the sandpaper out, fold it up in the back, put your finger along that curve and sand it. And then when you move up on the curve, move this finger and this one to contour those lines. So now, if you could see, we have this scuffed area, and then we have little areas over here that are still shiny, as well as up here. And I show you this because I want you to recognize these types of things. You want your entire piece or panel to look like this, completely flat. No shiny areas at all. But you see right here where we have these contour lines, how nice, and it got in that groove. This is how you want to do it. So go back and forth, circles, diagonal, to make sure you get every angle on this piece. Now when it comes to these edges in here in this lip, fold your sandpaper up like this, press down, and get inside that lip. This is where a lot of guys fuck up, and over time, if you don't sand this properly, because it's such just a small area, the paint won't adhere properly, your clear coat won't adhere properly, and it may look okay for a month or two, but eventually, because it's not sitting there with the heat and the expansion and the shrinkage of the clear coat, it's eventually going to bubble up, bubble up, bubble up, and then you're going to lose your whole piece. So it's imperative that you make sure to sand every nook and cranny, everything. This is the most troubling areas. You can use a red scotchbrite sponge, or you can get these little attachments on Amazon. I'll put the link in the description. Super cheap. It comes with all the different colors, which are different grits, but you can use this to get down inside of here. Another big part of this is not missing any little detail. So I've seen a lot of painters, when they paint a saddlebag, you open up the saddlebag and underneath here is still the OEM color and the edges. I hate that shit. Make sure you get all the edges. Just go around, scuff them up. And that's what this is great for. You can hit all these little edges. Even see how right there, you can smooth that out. Now when it comes to cleaning this, I just use glass cleaner and then wipe it. Make sure you clean all this off, because there's going to be remnants of that clear coat, remnants of the paint. You want to make sure this is super, super, super clean. So I will go over this probably 2 or 3 times to make sure I get everything off of here. Any residue is going to mess up your paint. So just remember, everything when it comes to the prepping the surface is for maximum adhesion. If you're not comfortable with your sanding skills, this can easily be painted over and paint will stick. But if you wanted to prime this, you can also re-prime this with high build, sand that down flat. So like if you had some areas that weren't really level, you can prime this with high build, sand it down, and you could go. But if you look at how easy fingerprints get on there, that's oil. When you spray your paint, it's not going to stick to that. So after you clean this thoroughly, you want to handle this using gloves. So now that we got our piece prepped, it's looking good. We're going to put it off to the side and then move on to our tank. So the stretch tank that we got is raw metal, and there is a certain type of primer that you have to use. There is a certain type of way that you have to prep it, because the raw metal coming from the factory, it has areas that aren't as smooth. It has pits, it has rivets. It'll probably have a little bit of oxidation and rusting on it if it wasn't protected. So I'm going to show you how to prep the raw metal and get that ready for prime. Right, so here is our metal tank, and if you can see, there's oxidation and rust marks. There's these lines that are dug in here from it banging around. It's not really flat. The surface is kind of chewed up. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use 800 grit sandpaper again, as well as red scotchbrite. I have a big scotchbrite ball, I'll show you, that I put on the end. I got a green scotchbrite, and then I don't know where my red one is. Oh, there it is. And a red scotchbrite ball, as well as these mini scotchbrites. When it comes to priming this, you're going to want to use self-etching primer, which is used for bare metal. So let's get it cracking. once you're done sanding this down, flattening and smoothing it out, you want to wipe it down with acetone or alcohol, or you can use reducer, but anything, wipe it over and over again to get all that dirt off there, any kind of oil, and then now we're going to hit it with the self-etching primer. All right, so now we got our self-etch primer on here, and what it does, it's got like this acid etching in it to where it adheres to bare metal. It's for bare metal like this is. So now what I'll do is I'll take my high build primer and I'm going to prime the tank and all of the pieces. So the front fender, the rear fender, as well as the saddlebags. I'm gonna just go ahead and prime those two just for extra satisfaction. And then when I'm done priming them, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sand it down and make it flat, and then we'll be ready for paint. Right, so when it comes to your gun setup, it's pretty simple, but there's some things that I want you to know first. On this bottom dial, this is your airflow. So all the way up would be the air's closed off, the less material is going to come out. All the way open is the most air is going to come out, the most material. Then you have your needle dial. So the needle, when you pull the trigger, the needle pulls out of the housing right here. So the more you back this out, the more material is going to come out. The more you put it forward, what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to pull the trigger that much. You're going to have a little bit of material. So I like to have this all the way out, and a good rule of thumb is if you watch my finger, see how it starts moving? You want to back it all the way out and then just go until you can feel it start pushing. That's a pretty good setting. Now up here, this is your fan dial. The farther you back this out, you're going to have more of a fan, and then the closer you put this forward, you're going to have more of a cylindrical circle. You don't want that at all. It works for some things, but you don't want it right now. Since we're doing the tank, it's not that much. It's not that big of a piece. What I'm going to do is I'm going to back this all the way out because I don't need the whole fan. And then I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, and that'll give me a perfect fan for this size. If you have too big of a fan or you're having too much material, you're just wasting material, you're wasting money. So when it comes to your PSI settings, I run this at 40 PSI for primer. This is an Iwata LPH 400. This just gives me the correct atomization that I like. You need to mess around with your settings, and if you have a question, at the top here, there will always be on every gun, it'll say the PSI or bar setting that this works for. So again, for me, I like this at 40. When I'm spraying clear coat, I have it around 37. It just gives me the correct atomization. So if you have a question about, where you should put it, take a piece of cardboard, spray the cardboard, and you should have a nice saturated oval shape. And you can just test it to make sure that your gun settings are okay before you put it on the piece. So when it comes to painting, you want to make sure that you're maintaining the same distance and the same speed across the whole piece. Go all the way across and then fan it out and start off the piece and then back on. And then you also want to overlap. So if you have a 5-inch fan, you're going to want to overlap half of that every time that you roll down. Just nice and easy, same speed, same distance, fanning it out. You're good to go. So now that the primer's dry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my spray bottle and 1200 grit sandpaper. I'm going to soak this down, spray this just like we did in the beginning, spray everything down, and then I'm going to lightly sand. You're not going to scrub the same way you did in the beginning. You're going to lightly sand this down because you just want to make sure that everything is smooth and that you have all the high areas broken down and you have a perfectly flat surface for when the paint lays on there. And this is critical. This is one of the most important parts, is making sure that this primer is sanded down to a flat surface. Now that we sanded it down with 1200 grit sandpaper, you do 1200 so that way you don't dig into this. You just want to take off the coats. And if you see the discoloration, this is similar to doing a guide coat but with primer. So this is all the high areas where it wasn't even, whereas now it's completely even, completely smooth. All those nicks and cuts that were in there are filled, and we're ready to paint. All right, so that's it. Pretty easy. Prep work is the single most important part of painting. Please remember that. Take the time, all the time in the world, to do your prep work. If your prep work's on point, everything else will go silky smooth, I promise. So I can't wait to bring you part 2, which is going to be paint and design. Until then, share, like, subscribe, all that shit. If you dig what I'm doing, let me know down in the comments if you have any questions or what I could do better. Until then, peace.